to discuss the importance of free speech today.
Well, free speech is very important. I don't know if you're referring to any place in particular. Perhaps they are, but
we've had free speech for a very, very long time here, so we're very proud about that.
Well, what's your advice on the small boats?
So let's talk today about Keir Starmer, who is the left-wing Labour Party leader of the United Kingdom. And I have to say, genuinely perhaps the most unimpressive man I have ever seen lead a major world power. I swear, every time I look at this guy, I think to myself, he's the prime minister, really? Of what was once, by the way, the mightiest empire in world history. You went from great statesmen like Winston Churchill and many others to Keir Starmer, ladies and gentlemen. But the news today is that Keir is fuming. First of all, for domestic reasons. He currently stands at a whopping minus 42% net approval rating per the latest poll. And keep in mind, it's only his first year as prime minister. He is set to be on pace with, I believe it's the president of Colombia, who has like the 3% approval rating, right? And of course, who could forget the fact, as we've covered a couple times recently, that millions of British people every single week are out in the streets protesting on behalf of patriotism, protesting against the insane migration, crime, and free speech issues that are currently basically breeding a political crisis over there. But secondly, there's a foreign reason behind all of this, which is that although it's already happening, President Trump, every single time he sees Keir Starmer, puts basically international pressure on the situation by calling him out specifically on these issues of migration and free speech. So amidst all of it, right, he's in a serious crisis. He's trying to do damage control. Apparently, on top of that, not only does Keir Starmer today have a response to Trump that was seriously pathetic, he sounds just like the Democrats. You know, crime is down. We're actually doing a good job, guys. We actually closed the borders. Nothing to see here. But furthermore, after the tremendous pressure, has apparently, guys, announced his new plan to tackle illegal immigration. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, a left-wing leader is saying he's going to, like, close the borders. That's impressive. But oh, wait, no, hold on. It gets a lot dumber than that. Apparently, let's not do deportations to fix illegal immigration. Let's not close the borders. Let's implement a mandatory digital ID nationwide. Probably thinking to yourself, what is that going to do? Well, we'll talk about it. So I want to talk both about kind of the back and forth with Trump in today's video, as well as this new digital ID law that is not only insane, it is just downright stupid. Like, the logic here does not equate. But of course, these are the performative solutions that the empty vessel himself, Keir, who, like, every time he talks, he literally just says nothing, is apparently presenting. So we will get into it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And that said, let's get into some international news. So if you're watching from the UK, shout out to you. Comment your flag, I guess, in the comment section down below. But that said, so let's, I guess, go back here to the beginning, which was a couple of weeks ago, I think actually last week, when President Trump made his state visit to the UK, because he called out Keir and, you know, the British government on this issue, which is apparently they're arresting something of 12,000 people a year for political speech, right, over their social media posts. This is something that's been massively seen. And take a listen here as Keir is about to, like, I guess, deny that any of it is happening when it obviously is, you know? Again, we've seen the videos of millions of people protesting in the streets. No, it's all okay. All right, take a listen and we'll show you what he is apparently now saying this week, because he's a total coward, and we'll explain why.
Having been in DC for a few weeks, it's really interesting to see how you run the country as a proud Christian leader. And it really begs the question to the Prime Minister, if you don't mind, are we still a Christian country? But also...
when you say we, are you talking here or...?
Here. The UK. I'm still British. I might live in America, I'm still British. But also... I
can't give you that answer.
That's for the Prime Minister. But also, despite what we talked about in Scotland a few weeks ago, we still have 12,000 people a year here being arrested for social media posts, for free speech violations. Does that not remain an important area that there is still a lot of disagreement on?
I'd like to have you answer that.
Yeah, look, I mean, in terms of I was christened, so that is, my church has been all my life, and we are, you know, that is wired into our informal constitution. Of course, we celebrate many other faiths as well, and I'm really proud that we're able to do so as a country. And on free speech, That has long lived in this country, free speech. It's one of the founding values of the United Kingdom.
Point and laugh, everyone. Point and laugh. Point and laugh.
And we protect it jealously and fiercely, and always will. And we will bear down on any limits on free speech. I draw a limit between free speech and the speech of those that want to peddle paedophilia and suicide social media to children. And therefore, I'm all for free speech. I'm also for protecting children from things that will harm them, paedophiles, those that peddle suicide, which has had a terrible consequence for individual, particularly teenagers. And so that's the balance we strike. But we have had freedom of speech in this country for a very long time, and we will always protect it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian.
That's funny, Keir. That's real funny. Yeah, needless to say, this is not what is actually happening in the United Kingdom. It's ironic that he would even bring up the subject of PDF-philia, because it was actually a pretty well-documented scandal recently, if you guys remember, that the British government was exposed for covering up gangs of certain people committing certain such acts. I don't know, I'm just saying, right? No, the reality of what is going on is that people en masse, 12,000 of them a year, by the way, are being arrested for political speech, which includes, as we've covered, by the way, social media posts. You know, even ones that are against Hamas, apparently. You know, I've seen people get arrested for that because they said it might be offensive. It might provoke outrage in the radical Islamic community that we have voluntarily decided to move into your neighborhoods, right? Same thing, we actually covered on the channel a guy who got arrested for saying, "I like bacon" in front of Islamic protesters there. Many other examples. You know the situation. But of course, Keir is going to deflect. But interestingly, I want you to notice a pattern because we're going to bring it up later on in the video. Which is, you see how he framed this? He passed this speech law that's in the guise of like, oh, we're going to crack down, for instance, on predators on social media. And everyone's like, who's really against cracking down on predators? Everyone wants to do that. But in reality, the law on paper says it's going to do that, but it ends up being weaponized, of course, against the patriots of Britain, the very same people who are protesting in the thousands to millions every single week out on the streets right now, which is another massive issue, of course, he is dealing with. You know, I think I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the British people are cucks. They're just sitting down and taking this. No. That's not actually the reality right now, right? There's a ton of people who are pissed off. They're getting really mad out there. You know, even in their more left-wing proclivities, perhaps in the United States, the truth is not a single British person voted for this migration crisis. As a matter of fact, they keep voting against it, whether you want to talk about Brexit in 2016 or even the fact that they forced Starmer to be quote-unquote anti-migration, at least on paper, in the last election, and yet still they're not getting the so-called democracy that people keep on selling. And isn't that so interesting? Same thing in the United States, by the way. How is it that people can overwhelmingly vote for something and overwhelmingly want something according to polls, and then the government says we do the exact opposite, but then they say we're like democratic. They say, look, we're different than those repressive authoritarian countries. We allow you to vote for your leaders, right? And then your leaders get into power, and then what? 12,000 people a year. If I'm not mistaken, I think international commissions actually state that this 12,000 number is more than the annual people who get arrested for violating speech laws in Russia and China. Okay, that's how bad it is. But anyways, that said, so this has been a recurring theme every time Trump sees Starmer. He'll bring up an issue like free speech or migration. Starmer, basically like the coward, the little wimp that he is, just sits there and takes it and tells Trump he loves him so much. But ironically, a week after that visit, apparently this guy, again, he won't say it to Trump's face, he'll only say it, after Trump leaves, is now being forced to respond to some of Trump's recent comments about things like, migration, crime, etc., saying it's, quote, ridiculous and nonsense. And as this poster points out, yes, he waits for Donald Trump to leave the UK in order to say this. Why did he stay silent when the big Don was standing beside him? A real tough guy. But anyways, take a listen to his copious response now to everything Trump's been criticizing him for as of late.
Fear of the introduction of Sharia law is nonsense. And Sadiq Khan is a very good mayor and actually driving down serious crime. So, as I say, there's a lot I agree with President Trump. We get along. We had a good state visit last week. But on this, I disagree with him. and the Sharia law comments were ridiculous.
Crime is down in London. Have you seen the statistics? Hey, Americans, where have we heard that one before? Like many different times. But anyways, specifically what Starmer is responding to there are comments that Trump made about London's very far left, radical, insane, pro-jihadi, yes, mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, about a week ago during that summit. But I want you to also notice, first of all, how Starmer said nothing in that moment, but a week later, now that Trump is gone, he said, it was ridiculous. It was nonsense. Like, what a freaking coward, first of all. But secondly, of course, this is a repeated trend where, you know, about 10 years ago, for instance, it's very similar, honestly, the way Democrats have been forced to change on these issues. Because 10 years ago, if Trump raised that question, they would just say, you're Islamophobic. How dare you say that? Don't you know Sharia means love? But now, because this stuff has become so unpopular, the new strategy by left-wing leaders is essentially to downplay or deny that it actually exists, right? So, oh no, there's no implementation of Sharia law in the UK or coming to the UK. But of course, we understand that's not true. As a matter of fact, right now in London, and it's been a phenomenon for about a decade now, there are literally Sharia law no-go zones where the police will not come to like certain Islamic neighborhoods, and they are, yes, ruled by Sharia law, you know? Try going there, for instance, as a non-Muslim and see how well that turns out, right? These are real things, right? But that said, essentially what Starmer and the Labour Party right now are dealing with is, and really all the political parties in Britain, are that these issues have become so insanely unpopular, and we're going to keep bringing this up, the massive protests in the streets, that they're being forced to do something about it. As a matter of fact, even in the election, what was it, like last year, 2 years ago, the Labour Party campaign as being like kind of anti-migration. You might say, wow, isn't that a shocker to see leftists be, you know, kind of closing the borders? But again, the real reason this is because, yes, it's been such a massive problem that even the both parties' consensus are at the very least like giving a little bit of lip service to the idea that maybe we should be a sovereign country, right? Maybe we should not allow millions of people to just flood in from wherever they want and come and implement basically Sharia law in the UK. But that said, of course, what you're going to get, much like you get exactly when it comes to Democrats in America, is half measures, right? Yeah, Americans, remember the bipartisan border bill that Joe Biden brought to the table and said, look, this will solve immigration. And in reality, it gives like amnesty to like almost millions of illegals. Same story here, because I want to talk now about Starmer's announcement today to implement a mandatory digital ID law for the right to work in the UK. And this is actually being presented, believe it or not, as his solution to illegal immigration. So in order to properly understand how dumb that is, I first of all want to rewind and ask you the question. If you were given the task of combating illegal migration, what would you do? Well, I think the answer is very obvious, right? First of all, close the borders. And secondly, deport the illegal migrants. Like, it's pretty simple, right? It's a linear, like, straightforward. Hey, you want to stop a problem, then stop a problem. The brilliant left-wing Labour idea here is, no, let's do digital ID. And you're probably wondering, what does that even have to do with illegal immigration? Well, take a listen here, and then we'll respond to it.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict.
Okay, so two thoughts. First of all, whenever this guy speaks, as I said, he doesn't actually say anything. It's just a bunch of platitudes and academic words. Root causes, social mobility, poverty. Okay, but what does that mean? What does that have to do with illegal immigration anyway? Listen, I'm Keir Starmer, you know. But secondly, this, of course, also summarizes whether it's Labour over there or Democrats over here, the way that liberals or left-wingers basically present solutions to problems like illegal immigration or crime, by the way, that are so insanely out there and stupid and like just not straight to the point, where they never even address the point to begin with, right? It's the same issue like when they say, oh, how do we tackle crime? Well, it should be very simple, right? Strengthen the police force, arrest the criminals, throw harsh punishments at the criminals. No, you don't get it. Actually, if you defund the police and fund social programs and do this and address poverty and social mobility and this 50-page social science study, trust me, that'll bring down crime. And it never actually works, right? It's just nonsense. It's just like pseudo-intellectual contrarian idiocy to the very obvious solution there. And that's exactly what this is. Again, please explain to me how digital ID, according to them, is going to solve the problem of illegal immigration, which he is presenting as like this pragmatic, compassionate solution, which of course means he doesn't actually want to solve illegal migration. But that said, as a completely good faith individual, let me represent or kind of summarize his argument properly and in context, so that way we can respond to it. So let's do that, right? So basically, the premise behind this whole digital ID idea is similar to E-Verify, which is to say, well, if we set this requirement up that will stop illegal migrants from being able to work jobs, they won't be able to work jobs anymore, and then kind of voluntarily, maybe they'll self-deport because the incentive is not there as much. So yeah, I get that. Like, I genuinely get what they're trying to say here, except there's a few major problems with it. Question number one I have: is that going to apply only to illegals, or does it also apply to like people with quote-unquote refugee or asylum seeker status? Because the vast majority of the migrants in the UK that are causing the problems, a lot of them are like refugees. So they have some level of status. Will that apply to the digital ID card? I don't know. I'm going to guess here, by the way, probably not. Probably not, number one. But number two, beyond that, that's kind of a more frivolous point here. Importantly, the assumption that illegal migrants who are not following the rules to begin with are going to start suddenly following the rules is nonsense. Okay, it doesn't actually make any sense, right? Who's to stop people from still circumventing these rules, right? When you're talking about illegal migrants, very often these are people who are probably working off the book anyway. They're working on stolen, basically British, national health insurance, which is their version of Social Security, right? Those numbers, okay? And thirdly, big question I have here: are the police actually going to enforce it? This is very important. Are the police going to go into these Sharia no-go zone neighborhoods and start checking everyone's ID card to make sure they're working legally? Again, I'm going to venture to guess the answer there is going to be no. So you further look like, what is the point of this law? What is it supposed to stop? Because you're going to have to actually enforce this law even as it's written in order for it to work. And I'm going to take a wild guess, it's not going to be heavily enforced. It might be heavily enforced against some native British citizen who just doesn't want to have the digital ID. Going to take a wild guess though, right? In those refugee neighborhoods, it's probably not. The police aren't going there to begin with. So what is going to change about that? Okay. And of course, all of this is circumventing the most obvious solution. Again, the way you deal with illegal migration is to close the borders and deport illegal migrants. Okay? Anything else, you could do something on top of it. But if you're not going to address those so-called root causes, Keir Starmer, right? It's not, war or poverty in other countries. It's the fact that they're coming to your country, you need to close the borders. Okay? So very important here to understand. Although I think we understand, guys, what this is really about. But much like the speech laws that they said were to tackle abuse and predation against children, but in reality are just being used against political activists. Which is the real reason they want a digital ID in the UK, is not to deport or find or identify a single illegal migrant. It is, of course, to give their government, which has become increasingly authoritarian and draconian, more and more authority to be able to have a digital database to understand who is, of course, protesting against issues, ironically, like migration, and, do more stuff like this right here.
If you've got stuff you'd like to gather, obviously I'm more than willing to talk through what you're able to take with you.
What, you're taking me away now?
Yes, so you're under arrest, so you're going to Harrogate, unfortunately.
You're taking me to Harrogate in the middle of the night over a tweet?
I am, unfortunately.
Is this what you signed up the police to do?
This is my role. I'm trying to be reasonable with you here.
So
if there's stuff you'd like to gather, I'm more than willing to allow you to gather some sort of stuff like medication, if you've got any numbers you need.
You know, it is kind of ironic how Democrats claim that forcing people to have ID is racist, but then you look at the British left and they're beating you over the head demanding you have a mandatory digital ID. Although in fairness, those positions are not really all that inconsistent with each other. Make no mistake, the reason why Democrats don't want ID now is simply because it makes it easier for them to gain power and win elections. Once they win those elections, once they have that power, this is exactly the same thing you could expect them to implement the next day. Hey, let's have like a total surveillance state in terms of your ID. But again, we understand what this is really about, right? That's why they want mandatory digital ID. And they're just doing it in the name of illegal migration to make it seem to the people who are really pissed off over illegal migration like, hey, look, we're doing something. You asked for this, right? Keir Starmer is basically like an evil genie, right? So the millions of people in his country ask, hey, can you please do something to address the migration crisis? He's like, no problem. Here is, a digital ID law designed to surveil and spy on you for protesting against my government. That's what you asked for, right? No, it's about illegal migration. Same thing with the speech law, right? Everyone agrees, hey, can you do something about bad people preying on children? Sure, here's a speech law that actually goes after people protesting against immigration, right? No, these are not what we asked for. But anyways, that said, if you had any skepticism of, again, the real intent here, take a listen as in this same exact speech, Keir Starmer says his government needs to, quote, gear up for violence against at least 3 million Brits over the recent poisonous beliefs displayed at the Tommy Robinson March and other protests across the country. Literally the same speech. So it's like he's talking about digital ID, and then he's saying this. I wonder what that's all about.
At its heart, its most poisonous belief, and this was on full display here in London just under 2 weeks ago, that there's a coming struggle, a defining struggle, a violent struggle for the nation, for all of our nations. And you don't have to be a great historian to know where that kind of poison ends up.
Yeah, so again, what did I say? Actually, forget that. What did he say? That's my evil genie theory in action. You have massive domestic pressure from your own citizens and now massive international pressure from Donald Trump in the United States to do something about migration. And they're like, okay, let's do digital ID. That's going to stop it. And everyone's looking around saying, that's not what we were asking you to do. Like, who asked for this? Who wanted this? Nobody, right? But no, look, we solved the illegal immigration, guys. Don't look it up. It's ridiculous, and needless to say, it's extremely unpopular even among British citizens as we speak. As a matter of fact, there is already an official petition to the UK government and parliament, and it gained over 1 million signatures. I believe this total number is now about 1.6 million signatures within the first 24 hours. Now, keep in mind, this is a formal government petition. If they reach over 100,000, it is now mandated to start parliamentary debate and massive protests going on. People are really pissed off about this. And frankly, I think in the end, as long as the pressure stays up, ultimately, this will not be implemented because of how ridiculous and insane it is. But yeah, essentially, there you have it, guys. Another story of ridiculousness out of the United Kingdom. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.